for having me here this evening, and it's actually a distinct pleasure to be at this institution. It's a kind of oasis of civility, which is in the most positive sense a throwback to the 1960s and 70s. You seem to have managed to preserve your authenticity despite the bombardment of consumerism and terrorism hysteria, which has infected every other place I've been to in the last several decades. And I mean that quite literally. I was very surprised when I came here and I wanted to go swimming, and they told us you can just walk into the gym. You don't have to pay a fee. You don't have to show 4 pieces of identification. You don't have to take off your shoes and get a body check. You just walk in and walk out. And then I wanted to use the computers to check my email. And lo and behold, you just walk into the library. You're laughing, but I don't think there's any place I've been which still preserves that sense of trust, community, and civility. I really don't know of any other. So that's a genuine credit to you. The buildings are of human scale. I didn't manage this time around to make it to Pickle, but I did make it to the natural food place. And I had a very good chili soup. The Greek wrap was a little bit on the skimpy side. I suppose it was what people who don't want to be inflated, that's the portion that was proper. I even had a chance to look through your school paper, and it was quite well done. I read, the first article I read was about your new East Asian Studies professor, who teaches East Asian religion, and it was a very nice, sympathetic article. And then I turned to the Facing article, and that was devoted to exercises to improve your sex life. And there was a special section for, as they put it, cowgirls. That was a little more 2000. Otherwise, it seems like a terrific place. And the young people who go here, I consider you very fortunate. Maybe you feel like you wish you were in a big city, but having lived the whole of my life in a big city, namely New York, I can tell you there are many, many virtues to living in a place like this, and living on the human scale and in a humane fashion, not least because there seems to be trust between the students and the community, and they can use the facilities like everybody else, which is, as in my opinion, it should be. In any event, that's not why I was invited here this evening. I was asked to speak on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and this year I decided to do something which I've not done in the past 3 decades that I've been lecturing on the topic. I first got involved about 3 decades ago now, June 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon. That was kind of my baptism. And quite unpredictably, for certain, at any rate in my case, it ended up consuming the whole of my adult life, the question of Israel and Palestine. And most of those 3 decades have been devoted to a pretty simple exercise. Namely, either in writing or in public lecture, I juxtapose on one side what the scholarly record shows, what the human rights record shows, what the documentary record shows, and on the other side, how the conflict is depicted in the media and in the public arena. And I demonstrate with not much difficulty, in fact you can say with remarkable ease, that a huge chasm exists, an abyss, a gaping hole between what the record actually shows and the way it's distilled in the public media and in the public arena. But for several reasons, I decided this time round I'm going to do something different. I'm going to speak to not what the record shows, but to how we can resolve the conflict. Because there's something positively preposterous. There's something absurd. There's something ridiculous about the longevity of this conflict. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. It's now in its most recent phase, that is to say, from the time of the June 1967 war. It's now twice as old as the majority of people in this room. And that just doesn't make sense. We're talking about a tiny, tiny pinprick on the world's map. And it simply does not make sense that this conflict just doesn't come to an end. And so, for that reason alone, I think we should start focusing on ending the conflict and not merely talking about the conflict. In addition, one of the reasons I decide not to do my conventional juxtaposition is because there has been a remarkable shift in public opinion, about which I'll get to in a moment, such that it's no longer necessary to, as it were, expose Israel's crimes and violations of human rights. There is now a broad knowledge, or a knowledge among the broad public, that the way Israel is carrying on is unacceptable, it's immoral, and it's illegal. And so it's kind of too easy to just join in at this point in what might be called the Israel bashing. Because unlike in the past, it's very difficult nowadays to find anyone who's going to defend Israel's conduct in public. And so I decided I wanted to do something more challenging than to simply once again go through that horrific record that Israel has at this point accumulated. But the final and the most important reason, related to what I've just said, but still a reason in its own right, for speaking about solving the conflict is because I think there is now a genuine possibility, if we do things right, if we're clear-headed and conscientious, there is a genuine possibility to resolve the conflict and to remove it from the category of current events and to place it where it belongs, namely the category of history. Things have changed significantly. In some instances, it's been an incremental change over the last couple of decades. In other cases, it's been an abrupt change. But whether it's incremental or abrupt, there has been significant changes such that there is now a possibility to resolve the conflict. First and most notably are the events in the Arab-Muslim world. Israel historically, its major ally in the Muslim world over the longest period, has been Turkey. But under the leadership of Prime Minister Erdogan, Turkey has now championed a much more aggressive position in defense of Palestinian rights. Now, in the case of the Turkish leadership, there is what you might call a very high bluster quotient. Mr. Erdogan's bark is wildly disproportionate to his bite, but nonetheless it's clear that the kind of complacent relationship Israel had with Turkey until now, it's over. That Turkey has, in one form or another, taken up the cause of the Palestinians, most recently in the case of Gaza and the Gazans. If Turkey was Israel's major ally in the Muslim world, its major ally over the past 3 decades in the Arab world has been Egypt. And in Egypt, too, as everybody in this room knows, and hard to believe, almost a year will have passed since those historic events next week. In Egypt, there has been a fundamental shift. You can't yet say how fundamental it will be, because it's a revolution in progress, as revolutions ought to be. It's not just a one-shot deal. It's going through phases and stages, and it'll take quite some time before we realize, before the dust settles and we see what's resolved. But what's certain in the case of Egypt is that to the extent that a government comes to power that's reflective of popular opinion and or